Welcome to Quantum Mind Hub Stories. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends. Your support means a lot to us. Alright, get comfy. Let's get started. In the glittering heart of a sprawling metropolis, where sleek skyscrapers punctuated the horizon and designer boutiques lined the boulevards, Alexander and Marina were the very embodiment of perfection. Outwardly, their lives shimmered with the allure of wealth and success. Luxury cars purring at the curb, private jets whisking them away on exotic getaways, and meticulously curated social media feeds that celebrated a life of opulence. Alexander, the charismatic CEO of a thriving multinational firm, moved with the confidence of a man who knew his worth, his every gesture steeped in authority. Marina, equally elegant and refined, was the silent partner in this picture-perfect tableau, her gentle smile concealing depths of intelligence and unspoken resilience. Behind closed doors, however, the reality was a far cry from the glittering facade that the world admired. In their palatial home, away from prying eyes, a dark secret lurked. Alexander's true nature, masked by his public charm, emerged in private as a narcissistic tyrant. His controlling manner and verbal barbs soon escalated to physical abuse. To the casual observer, their life was an enviable dream. Yet, each smile and shared glance was underpinned by a storm of hidden pain and tension that only Marina truly felt. As the city buzzed with energy and ambition, Marina's heart, though bruised, quietly ignited a spark. A slow-burning determination fueled by an inner strength that had always lain dormant beneath layers of fear and societal expectation. This juxtaposition of public allure and private agony set the stage for a reckoning that no one, least of all Alexander, could have foreseen. The seemingly invincible couple had begun to unravel at the seams, revealing a potent mix of shame, defiance, and the promise of an extraordinary comeback. The first signs that the perfect lie was crumbling emerged in the hazy early mornings at the mansion, where the light rarely betrayed the secrets hidden behind closed curtains. Alexander's charm in public meetings and elegant soirees masked a volatile temper that grew like a dark cloud over the days. In these hushed hours, Marina bore silent witness to the transformation of her husband from a dashing leader to a man whose control was maintained through cruelty. His words, initially laced with condescension and subtle put-downs, escalated into a relentless barrage that bruised her spirit long before his hands began to inflict pain. At family gatherings and high-stake business lunches, he'd casually remark on her fragility, a term laden with an unspoken threat that resonated with a harsh finality. Friends and business associates only caught fleeting glimpses of the tension, a raised eyebrow, a fleeting look of hurt in Marina's eyes, but none could decipher the true extent of the turmoil that brewed behind the scenes. While outwardly the couple dazzled every gathering with their impeccable taste and charm, beneath that veneer, Marina's heart was shattering quietly, each abusive moment carving a deeper scar. Every bruise, every whispered insult added to a growing collection of evidence that would one day speak louder than Alexander's carefully rehearsed lines of innocence. With each public event, the cracks deepened even if no one could yet see the fissures in their perfect social mask. The discord between private reality and public image became a haunting refrain, setting the stage for a powerful shift, a dramatic transformation that was destined to captivate everyone who witnessed it. As the pattern of abuse entrenched itself, the once gentle whispers of criticism gave way to louder, harsher voices of domination. Alexander's vicious behavior morphed from discreet snubs into overt displays of control, each action punctuated by the undeniable cruelty of his words and gestures. It was during one unremarkable Monday morning at their opulent home that the transformation became irrevocably clear. As Marina prepared for the day, Alexander's polite veneer slipped for a moment, revealing a cold, merciless glare before a sudden, explosive outburst shattered the morning calm. His hands struck without mercy, leaving not only physical marks but also deep, emotional lacerations. The violence wasn't confined to the intimate setting of their home, it bled into every public space, tainting the atmosphere wherever they ventured together. At business luncheons and high-profile meetings, the contrast between the man the world adored and the monster behind closed doors became painfully apparent. Marina, for her part, wore an expression of resignation that belied a growing resolve. Each bruise, each humiliation, was quietly recorded in the book of her life, a ledger of injustice that awaited its moment of reckoning. With every vicious act, she felt an inner strength kindle, small sparks of defiance lighting up the dark corridors of her mind. Though her body bore the marks of Alexander's rage, her spirit was already plotting a rebellion, a transformation that promised to shatter the cycle of abuse and expose the truth to the world. In that searing moment of violence, Marina began to understand that the power to reshape her destiny lay not in silent submission, but in a careful, determined resistance that would eventually redefine her existence. In the days that followed that brutal morning, a subtle yet significant change began to take shape in Marina's silent rebellion, a metamorphosis marked by the reapplication of her signature red lipstick. The vivid, bold color, once a mere accessory to her graceful appearance, now carried the weight of a clandestine protest. Each stroke across her lips was an act of defiance, an unspoken message that every insult and every bruise was no longer hers to endure in silence. In the mirror, the red glow exuded a transformation that went beyond cosmetic change. It became a symbol of her hidden determination and resilience. As she prepared for another day among the elite, the red lipstick was the silent flag of revolution, a marker of her coming transformation from a victim into a victor. Friends noticed an unusual fierceness in her gaze, a daring spark that defied the expected sorrow of her situation. Little did they know that beneath that soft-spoken exterior lay an intricate web of plans and secret alliances that were slowly taking shape. Each application of red was a silent whisper to herself, a promise of eventual retribution and liberation. In quiet moments away from the eyes of the world, Marina would trace the outline of her resolve with that crimson marker on her lips, reaffirming her commitment to reclaim her dignity. The red lipstick became a ritual, a daily vow to never be seen as weak again. It was her unassailable statement to a society that praised surface-level perfection even as it tolerated whispered scandals of domestic despair. The small act of rebellion was the first step in a journey that would soon culminate in a public, unforgettable showdown, leaving no doubt about the power of quiet resistance in the face of overwhelming abuse. At a pivotal business luncheon held in an elegant glass-walled boardroom overlooking the bustling city streets, the carefully maintained illusion of civility was shattered in a single, earth-shattering moment. The room was filled with influential figures, key investors, and the upper echelons of Alexander's professional empire, all gathered to witness a celebration of his success. In the midst of witty banter and polished speeches, a minor disagreement erupted between Marina and her domineering husband, a spat that had been brewing beneath the surface for far too long. With calculated cruelty, Alexander's hand shot out, delivering a resounding slap across Marina's face, the sound echoing off the high ceilings and silencing the room in an instant. For a brief, excruciating moment, time itself seemed to pause as a mixture of shock, horror, and quiet vindication hung in the air. In that split second, Marina's eyes locked with the head of the board, a gaze that conveyed everything she could no longer voice. The expression wasn't one of fear, but rather of steely determination and a promise of impending retribution. The boardroom, once a sanctuary of power and prestige for Alexander, suddenly became the stage upon which his true nature was laid bare. Every face in the room, initially frozen in disbelief, now absorbed this defining moment. The harsh reality that the man they celebrated was capable of such cruelty began to ripple through the audience. Even as murmurs began to swell like a rising tide, Marina, with barely a tremor in her posture, maintained a dignified silence that spoke volumes. That singular act of violence, raw and unfiltered, would soon serve as the catalyst for a sequence of events that would irreversibly alter the course of both their lives, setting the stage for a monumental upheaval that no one in that boardroom would ever forget. In the aftermath of that unforgettable boardroom incident, the atmosphere around Alexander and Marina became charged with an almost tangible electricity, a mix of sympathy, scandal, and simmering rebellion that rippled through every corner of their lives. Office whispers and hushed phone calls replaced polite greetings, and the once celebrated aura of the CEO began to crack under the weight of mounting public disbelief. Behind the scenes, Marina's pain slowly gave way to a cautious, burgeoning resolve. Every humiliation, every savage blow had carved a space within her where quiet strength could now take root. Even as Alexander attempted to bury the incident beneath layers of calculated charm, the damage was done. The spark of his cruelty was now a wildfire, igniting hidden defenses in those around them. The board members, once his loyal supporters, looked on with a mix of shock and newfound scrutiny, their trust wavering under the growing weight of evidence and whispered confessions. In the sterile corridors of corporate power, a silent revolution was taking shape. Marina, once the unassuming wife, had inadvertently become the symbol of resistance. Colleagues who had longed for a change in the toxic dynamics of the empire now saw in her a beacon of unspoken courage. With every passing day, as she nursed her wounds, both visible and hidden, she began to observe the subtle fractures in the system around her. Determined, she started to cultivate confidence among the staff, those who too had witnessed the darker undercurrents of Alexander's leadership. In private, over countless hushed conversations in dimly lit corners of the office or in the quiet solitude of the mansion's hidden alcoves, Marina began to weave a network of allies. Each secret meeting and every shared glance became a small act of defiance, a promise that no longer would the tyrant's power go unquestioned. Unbeknownst to Alexander, his empire, built as much on trust as on fear, was beginning to crumble from within, spurred by a voice he had long tried to silence. Over a series of discreet late-night meetings and hushed exchanges in shadowed corners of the office, Marina began forging alliances with a few trusted members of the staff, individuals who had quietly borne witness to the transformation of the man they once admired. In the understated language of covert glances and silent nods, plans were whispered into the night. These allies, hidden from the public glare of boardroom scrutiny, were crucial in building the evidence and consensus needed to challenge Alexander's reign of terror. Each conversation was laden with quiet conviction, a shared understanding that something had to be done. Marina, with her gentle demeanor now sharpened by determination, took careful notes of every instance of abuse and every moment of unbridled arrogance. In her humble study, beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp, she meticulously organized the tales of injustice into what would eventually become a dossier too heavy for any corporate board to ignore. The dim lighting and the silent hum of the night provided the perfect backdrop for these clandestine meetings, where each voice of solidarity became a tiny spark in a gathering inferno. In a world where power was customarily wielded through intimidation and subjugation, the subversive power of unity was a revelation. Every shared confession and every act of quiet support fortified Marina's resolve. This was more than just a personal quest for justice. It was the birth of a movement that promised to overturn the established hierarchies of abuse and oppression. In those moments, under the watchful eyes of a night that knew all secrets, Marina's quiet rebellion began to take on the contours of a full-blown uprising. A silent yet potent declaration that tyrants, no matter how revered, are always vulnerable when their crimes are unmasked. With her small but determined network in place, Marina took her next bold step by secretly installing a small hidden camera in the private study of their luxurious home, a decision that would irrevocably alter the balance of power. Late one night, as the household settled into the hush of sleep, she mounted the tiny device in a discreet corner of the room where she knew the unvarnished truth of Alexander's behavior would be captured. Every sound, every movement was recorded with clinical precision. The camera's unblinking lens was set to document the chaos of the night in all its raw, unfiltered reality, a reality that Alexander believed was safely hidden behind carefully closed doors. Marina's trembling hands steadied as she adjusted the lens, aware that this piece of technology was now both shield and sword. It would serve as irrefutable evidence of every violent outburst, every drunken tirade that had until now been safely confined to whispered rumors and half-truths. The simple act of installing the camera marked a turning point in her life, a moment when fear gave way to calculated resolve and despair transformed into a potent thirst for justice. In those fleeting moments before Alexander's nightly rampages began, Marina experienced a surge of empowerment. No longer would her suffering remain an invisible part of a glamorous facade, it would become the catalyst for her liberation and the downfall of a man who had long thrived on coercion and deceit. With every recorded moment that the camera captured, the walls of Alexander's carefully constructed empire would begin to crumble, exposing the true nature of a man who thrived on control at the expense of those who loved him. This hidden guardian of truth became the silent witness to a multitude of injustices, each frame a stroke in the painting of his inevitable collapse. Amid the quiet hum of the night and the steady click of the hidden camera's relentless documentation, Marina found solace in a peculiar ritual, a daily practice of writing heartfelt letters to her younger self. Sitting alone in the solitude of her private study, she gently unfolded crisp sheets of paper and began to pour her heart out in an unburdening cascade of words. These weren't just letters. They were cathartic confessions and declarations of a woman reclaiming her identity, one painful memory at a time. In the soft glow of a solitary desk lamp, the ink bled with raw emotion as she recounted moments of tenderness, hope, and crushing despair. The fragility of her once unshakable confidence, and the slow, desperate plea for rescue that had gone unheeded for years. Each letter bore witness to the emotional scars that marred her existence and the strength that lay dormant within the shadows of her sorrow. Though the words were written in solitude, they were also imbued with the promise of transformation. With every carefully chosen phrase, Marina rekindled the resilient spirit of the girl who once dreamed wildly without fear. The act of writing became a liberating confession, a reminder that even in the depths of her suffering, there remained an undeniable spark of beauty and hope. These love letters to herself served as both a mirror and a roadmap, reflecting the pain of her past and charting a path towards a future where her voice would no longer be silenced. Over time, these letters accumulated, forming a personal anthology of heartache and healing, a secret archive destined to become the cornerstone of her eventual triumph. In the pages stained with her tears, Marina's silent revolution was captured, each line a defiant promise that she would no longer be a victim but a survivor poised for the ultimate reclamation of her dignity. In the weeks that followed, as the hidden camera continued its ceaseless vigil and the letters became a trusted confidant of Marina's deepest truths, a sense of measured anticipation began to fill the air. Every recorded frame and every heartfelt word added a piece to a puzzle that would soon reveal the full extent of Alexander's dark empire of control. Despite the ever-present threat of his unpredictable temper, Marina's inner strength blossomed. In the quiet moments between the horrors of abuse, she would revisit the letters, reread the promises etched in ink, and fortify herself with every line that recalled her inherent worth. It was here, in this intimate exchange with her past self, that the future started to take shape. A future where silence was no longer an option and where every act of cruelty would be met with an equally determined measure of retaliation. The solemn ticking of the clock in that small study became a metronome for revolution. With each passing second, the evidence was building, and so too was the unyielding resolve of a woman on the brink of reclaiming her freedom. Marina realized that her isolation had inadvertently provided the space to strategize a full-scale counterattack, a way to harness the very tools of her oppression and turn them against her abuser. The meticulous documentation of every abusive incident, stored away like hidden gems in the fortress of her memory, was now being harnessed to rewrite the narrative of her life. In the delicate balance between darkness and light, she discovered that her vulnerability was not a weakness, but a wellspring of strength. An untapped reservoir that would soon surge forth with a vengeance, rewriting the rules of power in a way that no one could have ever anticipated. As days melted into nights and the shadows in the mansion deepened, Marina's careful planning converged with moments of raw emotional pain, forging a defiant spirit that was as unyielding as it was quiet. The hidden camera's unobtrusive lens captured not only the outbursts of Alexander's rage, but also the silent courage in Marina's eyes when she thought no one was watching. In the intimacy of these secret recordings, every harsh word, every violent gesture, was preserved as undeniable proof of a man who had long hidden his true nature behind a polished facade. The footage was not just a chronicle of abuse. It was a testament to the resilience of a human spirit determined to reclaim its dignity against all odds. Each shattered moment of silence grew into a rallying cry for justice, a mosaic of pain that would soon morph into a beacon of hope. In the quiet corners of her mind, Marina began to envision a future in which these incriminating clips and heartfelt letters would serve as irrefutable evidence against the man who had stolen her light. More than once, she had hesitated at the thought of unveiling these secrets to the world, afraid that the truth might cause irreparable harm. But as the evidence mounted, so did her resolve. The camera's unblinking gaze became both her silent ally and her most potent weapon, a means to unmask the tyrant for who he really was. In these moments of clandestine bravery, she felt the imperceptible shift in the balance of power. The very tools designed to oppress her were now gathering strength to ignite a revolution. Marina knew that the time to act was coming, that the dam of silence was nearing its breaking point. Each recorded abuse, every whispered confession captured in the soft hum of digital memory was a step closer to exposing the rot that had long festered within Alexander's empire. It was a truth that could no longer be ignored, a truth too powerful to be silenced by mere charm and money. Late one rain-soaked evening, as the city outside glistened with the reflections of neon lights and the perpetual hum of urban life, Marina sat before her computer with trembling fingers and a heart that raced with both terror and anticipation. The culmination of months of quiet torment, clandestine recordings, and tender love letters had reached its critical mass. That night, she decided to capture the definitive moment. An unambiguous chronicle of abuse that would expose the hidden monstrosity behind Alexander's charming smile. The rain was relentless, its rhythmic patter against the window a poignant reminder of the tears she had shed in solitude. In the charged silence of the living room, when the expected sounds of revelry and routine were replaced by the quiet tension of imminent reckoning, Alexander returned home. His eyes, still glimmering with the arrogance of unchecked power, betrayed no inkling of the storm he had unwittingly unleashed. With the quiet determination born of countless small rebellions, Marina activated the hidden camera, its red recording light a stark beacon in the otherwise dim space. As Alexander launched into another tirade, a furious outburst over trivial missteps and imagined betrayals, the camera documented every harsh word and every violent movement with clinical precision. Each second of the recording served as a testament to the rampant abuse that had been allowed to fester behind closed doors. In that moment, Marina's fear transformed into an incendiary resolve. She was no longer merely a bystander in her own life but an active participant in the narrative of her liberation. The evidence, now irrefutably captured on digital file, was more than a record of pain. It was the cornerstone of a powerful revenge that would soon shake the foundations of Alexander's empire. As the echoes of his outburst faded into the quiet hum of the recording, the camera continued its steady vigil, silently bearing witness to a defining moment in the relentless struggle for justice and dignity. The following morning, with dawn's gentle light coaxing the city awake, Marina's pulse pounded in her ears as she prepared to take the next critical step in her transformation. The hidden recordings, now safely stored on an encrypted drive, held every unspeakable detail of Alexander's abuses. The brutal slaps, the sneers, and the quiet, almost imperceptible moments of power exercised over her body and soul. In that quiet moment of reflection, as she reviewed the footage, Marina's heart teetered between despair and a dawning clarity. Every harsh image was interlaced with her own emerging resolve. The evidence was damning, but it was also transformative. A collective record that spoke of years lost in silent suffering and a future waiting to be reclaimed. With unwavering determination, she composed an anonymous email that would change everything. Every carefully chosen word was laced with the certainty that the truth, once unleashed, would shatter the veneer of perfection Alexander had so meticulously built. The email was addressed to the company's board of directors, a body that prided itself on upholding a semblance of integrity and accountability. In the digital missive, she attached snippets of the recordings, meticulously selected to illustrate the depth of his cruelty without revealing her identity just yet. The act of sending that email was both cathartic and revolutionary, an admission of truth that defied the tyranny of his reputation. The click of the send button resonated like the opening notes of a long-awaited symphony of justice. In that instant, Marina surrendered her anonymity to create a force that would become impossible to ignore. The board, upon receiving the startling evidence, would soon be forced to confront the dark underbelly of a man they had revered. As the morning light grew brighter, so did Marina's courage, illuminating a path that would lead to a reckoning so profound that even the indomitable walls of Alexander's power could no longer contain it. Within the sterile walls of the boardroom, where hushed conversations and strategic maneuvers were the norm, an atmosphere of palpable tension began to brew. The board members, once steadfast supporters of Alexander's empire, huddled around a gleaming conference table, their expressions etched with disbelief and concern as they reviewed the anonymous email and its damning evidence. Each member's face, illuminated by the glow of laptop screens and punctuated by furrowed brows, bore witness to the mounting realization that their charismatic leader's pristine image was nothing more than an elaborate facade concealing unspeakable cruelty. As they deliberated, voices that had once spoken in reverent tones now rose in disillusioned murmurs. The discussion, initially filled with cautious speculation, gradually evolved into a fierce debate about accountability, ethics, and the future of the company. Some recalled the subtle signs they had once dismissed as harmless eccentricities, while others expressed horror at the thought of supporting a regime founded on such brutality. Amidst the charged silence, one influential board member demanded clarity, urging the group to confront the evidence head-on. The room, once an arena of polished professionalism, transformed into a battleground of moral reckoning. Each recorded moment, a slap in the heat of anger, a sneer disguised as a joke, an offhand remark heavy with implication, served as a stark reminder of the human cost of unchecked power. In that moment, the board recognized that the fate of the company was inextricably linked to the truth. With mounting resolve, they initiated an emergency meeting, determined to act before the situation could spiral further out of control. The air was thick with suspense as each member grappled with the realization that the very foundations of their enterprise were built on a legacy of silence, a silence that was now being shattered piece by the courageous, albeit anonymous, act of defiance. The scene was set for a confrontation that would alter the corporate landscape forever. As the emergency meeting unfolded amid a storm of whispered accusations and fervent debates, Alexander's once unassailable composure began to disintegrate. The board members, armed with the incontrovertible evidence, expressed their collective horror and disappointment in increasingly impassioned tones. The atmosphere of power and prestige that had once enveloped the boardroom was replaced by a raw, unfiltered demand for accountability. Alexander, who had spent years cultivating an image of untouchable authority and charm, found himself cornered by a barrage of questions and accusations that pierced the carefully constructed veneer of his persona. His confident rhetoric faltered as the weight of the evidence bore down on him. In that charged moment, every word he had once spoken with such bravado now rang hollow against the backdrop of his transgressions. The board's discussion pivoted from cautious inquiry to a full-throated denunciation as each member recalled incidents, some once dismissed as isolated outbursts, that now coalesced into a damning pattern of behavior. Outside the boardroom, rumors began to trickle through the corridors of power, carried on hushed voices and wary glances. The once unified front of corporate loyalty fragmented under the strain of the emerging truth. Amidst the rising tide of anger and betrayal, Alexander's internal panic was evident. The man who had once commanded respect with a mere nod now found his authority unraveling, his future uncertain. Behind closed doors, whispers of legal repercussions and public disgrace fluttered like dark omens. Though still attempting to salvage his crumbling image with desperate reassurances, his pleas fell on skeptical ears. In that moment of public unmasking, Alexander was forced to confront the irreversible damage his actions had wrought, not just on the company he presided over, but on the lives he had so carelessly destroyed in his pursuit of power. The boardroom, once a sanctuary of elite decision-making, had transformed into the arena of his final reckoning. As the board's decision solidified into a unanimous call for action, the atmosphere in the corridors of power shifted dramatically. Alexander's once iron grip on his empire began to crumble as the echoes of accountability reverberated through every hallway and office. News of the boardroom's revelations spread quickly, carried on the breath of corporate insiders, and through the rapid currents of social media. In high-rise offices and upscale cafes alike, whispers of scandal and betrayal stirred, electrifying the urban landscape with the prospect of long-overdue justice. Meanwhile, Marina, no longer a silent sufferer behind closed doors, stepped forward with a quiet dignity that belied the inner tempest she had endured for so long. clad in professional attire that contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding around her. She walked into yet another high-stakes meeting with the calm resolve of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. There was an unspoken message in her deliberate, measured steps. She was no longer defined by her scars, but by her capacity to transform them into weapons against injustice. As she entered the room, heads turned, and murmurs of recognition began to surface among those who had once believed in the sanctity of Alexander's leadership. Her presence radiated a fierce inner strength, an embodiment of every painful moment rechanneled into a drive for vindication. Without a word, her eyes met those of a key board member who had silently questioned everything for far too long. And in that look, a mutual understanding was forged. The room, thick with the tension of unmet expectations and a collective yearning for a new dawn of accountability, braced itself for the inevitable confrontation. Each participant felt the gravity of the moment, one in which the facade of invincibility was finally set to shatter, and where every small act of bravery over the years converged into one resounding declaration. No longer would abuse be tolerated, and no longer would those who perpetuated it escape justice. In that charged silence, the stage was unequivocally set for a final reckoning that promised to reshape the very foundations of power. With the boardroom now a crucible of raw emotion and collective resolve, Alexander's once commanding presence began to unravel in real time. The tension in the room was nearly palpable, a mixture of betrayal, righteous indignation, and the electric anticipation of the audience that had long yearned for this moment. Amid the chorus of discontent, Alexander attempted a frail defense, his voice trembling as he tried to dismiss the evidence as isolated incidents taken out of context. His words, once delivered with the vigor of a master orator, now faltered under the relentless scrutiny of facts and the unyielding gaze of those he had wronged. Marina, who had been quietly observing from the shadows of the unfolding drama, felt the culmination of years of silent suffering and simmering defiance intensify within her. Her eyes, though tired, burned with an intensity that betrayed the quiet storms of emotion that had fueled every clandestine act of rebellion. Every board member present was forced to reckon with the stark reality that the man before them was no infallible titan but a man whose brutal treatment of someone he loved had now come to define his legacy. The boardroom, previously a temple of polished strategy and high-stakes decision-making, was transformed into a space of raw human vulnerability and moral clarity. As whispers of impending legal action and public disgrace filled the air, the groundwork for Alexander's public downfall was laid bare. The pervasive sense of accountability was unmistakable. Here was a turning point where the reverberations of hidden abuses would no longer be contained but unleashed into the world. In that charged atmosphere, every tick of the clock seemed to echo with the sound of a breaking chain, a liberation long yearned for by those who had suffered in silence. It was a moment when the scales of power finally tipped in favor of truth and the once unstoppable force of tyranny stood exposed before an unforgiving court of public opinion. The confrontation, though unceremonious and raw, was unequivocal, a declaration that those who wield power through cruelty would one day fall, and that justice, however delayed, was an inevitable force in the cosmic balance of right and wrong. As the day unfolded beyond the sterile confines of the boardroom, the city itself buzzed with whispers of scandal and revolution. In sleek offices and crowded cafes alike, the ripple effects of the board's decision resonated powerfully. Alexander's fall from grace was no longer confined to hushed board meetings or legal advisories. It had transformed into a public spectacle. Journalists, previously enamored by his charismatic facade, now reeled from the revelations like moths drawn to a blazing light. Social media erupted with hashtags and viral threads, each post and tweet echoing the collective outrage of a society that had long tolerated abuse hidden behind glimmering facades. Yet amid the cacophony of public judgment and the relentless churn of news cycles, Marina maintained a quiet fortitude. The woman who had once been shrouded in silence was now the face of a movement that demanded accountability, justice, and change. Supported by a network of allies whose courage had grown from the shared experience of oppression, she embraced the role of the unexpected heroine, a beacon of resistance in a world that had once revered power without question. In the quiet moments between the storm of public attention, Marina spent time reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this precipice. Every tear shed in solitude, every whispered plea for help had all been leading to this defining moment of transformation. Her inner narrative was no longer one of victimhood but of empowered reclamation, a transformation that illuminated the stark contrast between the polished image of abuse and the raw truth it concealed. As the first threads of light broke through the overcast sky, Marina sensed that the dawn of a new era had arrived, one in which the reckoning for past wrongs was not just a distant hope but a tangible, unfolding reality. The city, with all its contradictions and complexities, was ready to witness the final act of a saga that had challenged the very notions of power and control. In every shared glance, every word of encouragement from her newfound supporters, the promise of redemption echoed resoundingly, a promise that the era of silent suffering was finally coming to an end. In the ensuing days, as the public fallout intensified, Alexander found himself increasingly isolated in a sea of disillusionment and betrayals. His once loyal investors began to question not only his leadership but the very values that had propelled his empire to such dizzying heights. Corporate boardrooms that were once arenas of unwavering confidence now resembled murky battlefields where every word was scrutinized and every previous misdeed was dredged up from the depths of silence. For Alexander, the transformation from a revered titan to a despised pariah was both swift and merciless. The evidence curated by Marina was being replayed across news channels and social media platforms with relentless persistence, its impact magnified by the inexorable power of collective outrage. In interviews and press conferences, voices of former supporters now condemned the hypocrisy of a man who preached success while perpetuating cruelty behind closed doors. Once heralded for his visionary leadership, Alexander was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a man undone by the very pride that once elevated him. Each passing day reinforced the harsh reality of his crumbling empire. His financial assets began to evaporate as shaken investors withdrew their support and rumors of impending legal action swirled ominously in every polished corner of the business world. Within the echoing halls of his former headquarters, the silence became deafening, a stark contrast to the boisterous confidence of his past. Yet amid this rapid descent, a small, determined voice of defiance emerged from the shadows. Marina, with her steady resolve and unyielding courage, had set in motion an irreversible chain of events that now threatened to engulf every remnant of Alexander's once untouchable legacy. The fall of a titan was unfolding before the eyes of a society hungry for justice, and the bitter taste of retribution was now imprinted in every whispered conversation and every headline that screamed of his demise. In the stark light of truth, the final act of his reign was rapidly approaching, and no power, however formidable once thought, could withstand the relentless tide of accountability forever. As the scales of justice continued to tip, the reverberations of Alexander's undoing began to transcend the corporate world, spilling over into the broader cultural fabric of the city. Ordinary citizens who had long harbored silent frustrations with systemic abuse of power found a new rallying cry in Marina's story. Public forums, community centers, and even local cafes buzzed with impassioned discussions about the need for accountability, not just within high-powered boardrooms but in every corner of society where voices were stifled by tyranny. Every retelling of the story carried with it an empowering message that real strength was found in vulnerability and that one person's resolve could set off a chain reaction of change. The media, too, sensed that this was more than just a scandal. It was a defining moment that would reshape public expectations. Headlines and primetime discussions shifted their focus to the narrative of redemption, emphasizing not only Alexander's disgrace but also Marina's arduous journey from silent victim to outspoken advocate for justice. Social media platforms saw a surge of supportive messages, memes, and even viral challenges as individuals from all walks of life declared their solidarity with Marina's cause. In classrooms and boardrooms alike, discussions about power dynamics, gender roles, and the need for systemic reform took on new urgency. The tale of a woman who had dared to confront a seemingly invincible oppressor resonated deeply with anyone who had ever felt voiceless in the face of injustice. In this broader cultural context, Marina's fight transformed into a symbol of hope and renewal, a powerful narrative that underscored the inherent right of every individual to reclaim their dignity. The rising tide of public sentiment signaled that the era of unchecked abuse, no matter how entrenched in tradition or power, was nearing its end. Across the city, In the murmur of everyday life, people began to realize that when silence is broken, the echoes of justice are both transformative and unstoppable. As the momentum of public opinion built into an unstoppable force, the final collapse of Alexander's empire took on an almost cinematic quality, a meticulously orchestrated downfall that left no stone unturned. Investors, once mesmerized by the charisma of a self-made tycoon, now abandoned ship in droves. Boardroom alliances that had once clung to his every word dissolved into scattered expressions of regret and disillusionment. Legal advisors began circling with plans to initiate actions that would hold him accountable for years of unchecked cruelty. In the midst of this corporate disintegration, the board of directors moved decisively to sever all ties with the man whose legacy had now become synonymous with abuse. Every press release, every public statement was crafted with the cold, clinical precision of an institution determined to distance itself from the stain of his misdeeds. The media's relentless coverage ensured that Alexander's name became a byword for unchecked power and its inevitable collapse. In interviews, former confidants recounted their own moments of quiet horror, contributing to a narrative that was as much a personal testament to betrayal as it was a public denunciation. In boardrooms across the world, case studies were quickly being drafted on how even the mightiest empires could fall when built on the shaky foundations of cruelty and deception. For the first time in decades, accountability had become the single most powerful currency in the corridors of power. And at the epicenter of this transformation was Marina, a woman whose quiet rebellion, fueled by both anguish and a fierce determination for justice, had dismantled a legacy of abuse one recorded moment at a time. As whispers turned into shouts and accusations evolved into legal mandates, the collapse of Alexander's empire was not merely a corporate failure, it was the triumph of raw human dignity over an insidious culture of silence. With every passing hour, the unstoppable march of justice solidified, leaving behind a stark reminder that even the most formidable power can crumble when its foundation is built upon fear. In the weeks that followed the irreversible unraveling of Alexander's empire, a palpable shift took hold in the hearts and minds of those who had once lived under the oppressive shadow of his reign. The city, once dazzled by the veneer of his success, now buzzed with a newfound awareness of accountability and justice. In boardrooms previously dominated by the rhetoric of unchecked ambition, discussions shifted towards rebuilding with integrity, embracing transparency, and ensuring that the tragic cycle of abuse would never again be tolerated. Amid the sweeping reforms and public condemnations, Marina emerged as the unlikely heroine whose resilience had set this transformative process in motion. Still carrying the silent scars of her past, she now drew strength from every step of her arduous journey, from each quiet moment of introspection to every clandestine act of defiance that had contributed to her liberation. The transformation was not immediate, and the wounds of the past would take time to heal, but an unspoken promise filled the air. People began to whisper of new beginnings where power was tempered with empathy and compassion rather than ruthlessness. Social media platforms, once explosive with outrage, now became spaces of reflective dialogue and constructive change. In community centers and local forums, discussions were held on how to empower individuals, ensuring that no one else would be forced to endure the same silent suffering. Marina's story had become a rallying cry for change, an emblem of the possibility that even in the darkest of moments, the human spirit could rally and emerge victorious. While legal battles and corporate restructuring took center stage, the real victory was measured in the hearts of those who had once felt powerless. In every shared conversation, every public protest, and every act of kindness in the wake of despair, the legacy of a once feared tyrant was being replaced by a burgeoning culture of empathy and strength. The transformative power of truth had paved the way for a future defined not by the shadows of abuse, but by the radiant promise of justice for all. As the dust of public upheaval gradually settled, the focus slowly shifted from the ruins of Alexander's empire to the remarkable rebirth of Marina's own life. Embracing the quiet confidence that had grown from years of suppression, she began to step into the spotlight, not as a victim, but as a symbol of unyielding empowerment. Invitations to speak at community events, women's rights forums, and inspirational conferences started pouring in from across the city. Marina, though wary of exposing the raw scars of her past, recognized that every shared moment of vulnerability was an opportunity to ignite change and educate others. In her newfound role, she prepared to tell her story with an authenticity that resonated with countless individuals who had experienced similar betrayals. The journey from silent suffering to outspoken liberation was not a tale of instantaneous heroism. It was an arduous, painful process punctuated by moments of reluctant bravery and decisive action. With each step she took on the stage, Marina reclaimed a piece of the life she had been denied for so long. Her presence was a quiet but thunderous declaration that abuse would no longer be hidden behind closed doors or masked by luxurious facades. Instead, it would be exposed and confronted head-on. In her first major public appearance following the scandal, Marina stood on a modest stage, her red lipstick as bold as ever, a symbol of the resilience that had been forged in the fires of adversity. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady and unwavering, recounting the events that had led her to this moment of public reckoning. Every word was laced with both pain and hope, an intricate blend that transformed her personal saga into a universal call for change. The audience listened, rapt and tearful, each person finding echoes of their own struggles in her narrative. That day, Marina not only reclaimed her narrative but also lit a spark of empowerment that promised to illuminate even the darkest corners of injustice. With every appearance and each carefully delivered speech, Marina's transformation rippled far beyond the confines of a single dramatic scandal. The woman who had once been resigned to a life of quiet torment now embraced her newfound role as an advocate for those who had long been silenced by fear. Invited to address audiences at schools, corporate seminars, and even televised forums, she became a living testament to the strength that could emerge from the most harrowing experiences. As she recounted the story of her personal journey from the gilded confines of a destructive marriage to the stirring moment of liberation that captivated an entire boardroom, her narrative resonated on a deeply emotional level. People from all walks of life found solace in her words, drawing parallels between their own hidden struggles and her public act of defiance. In each speech, Marina emphasized not only the injustice she had endured but also the importance of reclaiming one's power, no matter how insurmountable the odds might appear. She spoke candidly about the small moments of rebellion that had gradually built into a force capable of toppling even the most intimidating tyrants. The red lipstick she wore was no longer just a personal emblem of defiance. It had become a powerful symbol of the transformative potential inherent in every individual who dared to stand against injustice. Every eye in the crowd, every attentive listener, was reminded of the undeniable truth that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit could rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. As Marina's fame spread, so did a sense of collective empowerment. Community groups and activist networks began to mobilize, using her story as a rallying cry to challenge abusive power dynamics on both personal and institutional levels. Her journey was no longer just a story of personal survival. It had evolved into a movement that celebrated resilience, demanded accountability, and inspired countless others to break free from the chains of silence. Every public address, every heartfelt confession, sowed seeds of hope, reaffirming that the fight for justice was not in vain and that change was not only possible, but inevitable. In the wake of her public awakening, Marina found herself continuously drawn into a whirlwind of media attention and community engagement that further amplified her message of resilience. Interviews on popular news channels, podcasts by influential thought leaders, and viral social media posts all contributed to painting a vivid portrait of a woman who had turned her personal tragedy into a universal call for justice. With every encounter, Marina's voice grew stronger and more resolute, echoing a timeless truth about the nature of human dignity that no matter how deep the scars, healing and reclamation were always within reach. Her narrative was imbued with raw honesty and vulnerable moments of reflection that touched the hearts of millions, reminding them of the transformative power of courage in the face of despair. She candidly recounted the early days of her isolation when every act of abuse had eroded not only her body but her very sense of self. Yet, amid the darkness, she had discovered a reservoir of strength she never knew existed, a strength that would ultimately enable her to turn the tide. Through her public speeches and intimate conversations, Marina emphasized that every person deserved to reclaim their identity and redefine their destiny. Her words were both a bomb and a battle cry, a call to arms for anyone who had ever felt diminished by the weight of oppression. As her message spread, communities rallied around her, forming support groups, launching initiatives to combat domestic abuse, and holding public forums where survivors could share their stories without judgment. Each narrative of hardship was met with collective resolve and the unshakable belief that change was not only possible but already underway. In sharing her story, Marina hoped to dismantle the pervasive silence that had long allowed such cycles of abuse to flourish, replacing it with a chorus of empowerment and solidarity. Her journey, punctuated by moments of both heartbreak and triumphant breakthrough, served as a living reminder that while the path to justice might be long and treacherous, every step forward was a triumph in itself. A testament to the enduring spirit of human resilience. As Marina's influence continued to radiate beyond the confines of her personal story, the transformative impact of her journey began to infiltrate not only individual lives but also the very fabric of community consciousness. In neighborhoods once haunted by the specter of unchecked abuse, local organizations began hosting workshops and support sessions where survivors could share, learn, and heal. The message was clear: silence was no longer acceptable and every individual possessed the right to reclaim their dignity. In these grassroots gatherings, Marina's story was the spark that ignited a broader dialogue about respect, justice, and the importance of self-advocacy. People empowered by her narrative started to speak out against long-standing patterns of mistreatment in their own lives, whether in the workplace, at home, or within their communities. The once unseen scars of humiliation were slowly being replaced by stories of resilience and recovery. In city council meetings and community centers, discussions on implementing more robust protections for victims of abuse and protocols for holding perpetrators accountable became a central focus. These local efforts, fueled by the momentum of Marina's courage, began to shape public policy and influence decision-making at higher levels. Beyond the sphere of activism, her story found its way into artistic expressions: a mural depicting a phoenix rising from the flames, a poem trending on social media, a series of short films chronicling personal victories over adversity. Every medium carried the underlying promise of hope and renewal. The transformative energy that Marina had unleashed was not contained by the boundaries of her own recovery. It was a contagion that spread, inspiring communities to challenge oppressive norms and build a future grounded in empathy and fairness. In turning her personal pain into a universal call for change, Marina had done more than transform her own life. She had initiated a cultural shift that would reverberate for generations. Her journey was a collective triumph, a testament to the idea that when truth is allowed to surface, it can nurture an environment where healing and empowerment are not just possible, but inevitable. As the final chapters of this turbulent saga began to take shape, the dramatic crescendo that had been building for so long arrived in a moment of unequivocal confrontation. The epic climax unfolded in a grand meeting at the very headquarters of Alexander's former empire. A symbolic battleground where the cumulative weight of his misdeeds would be thrust into the light. Surrounded by former colleagues, disillusioned investors, and a public whose patience had long worn thin, Alexander was forced to face the full force of the reckoning he had avoided for years. Amid a maelstrom of accusatory stares and fervent outcries, Marina strode into the room with the calm precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. In one quiet, defiant gesture, she placed a neatly folded set of divorce papers atop the polished conference table, a final, irrevocable severance from the man who had once held her captive in a gilded cage. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the promise of retribution and the inevitable shattering of a corrupt legacy. In that charged atmosphere, every whispered word and every set of eyes fixed upon her spoke of a profound shift. An electrifying moment when the oppressed reclaimed their voice and a tyrant was unmasked for all to see. Alexander's attempts to interject or deny the mounting evidence fell on deaf ears. Each piece of damning footage, each account of abuse that echoed around the room, underscored the brutal reality of his actions. With an air of quiet dignity, Marina delivered a final statement, a declaration that her journey of pain had been transmuted into a call for justice for all those who had suffered in silence. Her words, measured and resolute, were a resounding dismissal of the man who had once considered himself untouchable. In that moment, time seemed to stand still as the full weight of accountability descended upon him. The room was no longer a venue for corporate maneuvers but a stage for a public moral reckoning. Alexander's empire, once buoyed by lies and intimidation, crumbled before the collective power of truth. A truth that had been carefully preserved in hidden recordings and whispered confidences, now roaring out for all the world to hear. In the days that followed the monumental showdown, as the dust settled over the corridors of power, the transformation that had been set into motion continued to blossom in unexpected ways. The fallout from Alexander's public disgrace reached far beyond the sterile walls of boardrooms and corporate headquarters. His once-storied empire, stripped of its commanding presence, found itself embroiled in legal battles, financial ruin, and an insurmountable loss of public trust. Yet amidst the chaos, a new narrative began to take shape, one defined by redemption, recovery, and the steadfast determination of those who had long suffered in silence. Marina's courage had ignited a powerful collective awakening. Voices that had been muted by fear were now clamoring for change. Community groups, emboldened by her example, rallied to establish support networks for survivors of abuse, ensuring that no individual would have to face their demons alone. Within the heart of the city, new policies and initiatives took root, inspired by the undeniable message that accountability and empathy were far more potent forces than unchecked ambition and cruelty. Schools, local government bodies, and even international organizations began to discuss innovative measures to prevent the cycle of abuse from repeating. The metamorphosis of a once-tainted corporate empire into a symbol of caution and learning became a living testament to the idea that, in the end, truth invariably triumphs. Marina, though forever marked by her past, now stood as a beacon of hope, a living reminder that the journey from despair to empowerment could spark a far-reaching ripple effect, touching lives in ways that reverberated through communities and across generations. As the city slowly healed, the saga of injustice and retribution morphed into an enduring legacy of resilience. One that would forever stand as a solemn reminder that the strength of one voice can indeed lead to the liberation of many. In the final stages of this remarkable saga, as the echoes of Alexander's downfall faded into memory, a palpable sense of renewal embraced every corner of the urban landscape. The dramatic chain of events had transcended the confines of one man's cruelty, resonating as a universal testament to the power of truth and the indomitable spirit of those who dare to stand up against tyranny. Across city streets once dominated by whispers of scandal, a vibrant movement had taken root, a movement dedicated to creating safer, more empathetic communities where everyone's voice mattered. Local leaders, inspired by Marina's act of defiance, began organizing regular town hall meetings and awareness programs. Activists utilized social media platforms to share stories of recovery and empowerment, amplifying the voices of survivors and sparking conversations that echoed far beyond the initial scandal. Amid these efforts, Marina continued to emerge as a quiet force of nature, a woman who, despite the countless scars of her past, shone as a symbol of hope and resilience for thousands of others. Her journey served not only as a personal catharsis but as a broader call to action for every individual battered by injustice. With every rally, every community event, and every heartfelt conversation in coffee shops and community centers, the narrative of abuse was being rewritten, transformed into one of strength, perseverance, and ultimately, liberation. This profound transformation was a living, breathing reminder that change is possible when courage meets determination and when the collective strength of a community breaks the chains of silence. As the city looked forward to a future free from the shadows of abuse, the legacy of a woman who had once suffered in silence now stood tall, a beacon that would guide generations to come toward a more just and compassionate world. In the final act of this transformative journey, Marina's life had come full circle, evolving from a figure of quiet suffering into an emblem of unstoppable empowerment. Standing on a grand stage at a nationally televised women's conference, her red lips and graceful poise radiated a quiet defiance that resonated with everyone in the audience. With a clear, confident voice, she recounted the painful chapters of her past, the injustice inflicted by a man whose charm once masked his brutality, and her own courageous reclaiming of power. Each carefully chosen word, honed through years of hardship and renewal, was a rallying cry to all who had felt voiceless. Never wait for a hero, she declared boldly. Be your own. The applause that followed was not just a tribute to her survival, it was a sweeping affirmation that every whispered tale of abuse could transform into a symphony of resilience and reform. As the cheers echoed, Marina's eyes sparkled with the promise of a better tomorrow, a tomorrow where accountability and compassion replaced indifference and fear. In that electrifying moment, the scars of her past became emblems of hard-won wisdom. An unbreakable strength, inspiring thousands across the nation to rise, stand up, and speak out against injustice. With every heart uplifted and every tear turned into a smile, her journey became the catalyst for a new era. Now, as you share this story, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, and comment below with your perspectives or key lessons learned from Marina's incredible transformation. Let this be a reminder that in the fight against injustice, every voice matters and that every act of courage can change the world.